Hey everyone, welcome to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and your co-host,
Kevin Toffel.
And we have an awesome show for you today. We are going to be talking about Amazon's new security offering as such, someone leaving Amazon, Facebook's plans for the smart home market, Fitbit and health data, a new SmartThings hub, a dead company, a company that is trying to be resurrected, and some plans in the UK for Zigbee-based smart metering. So, all this plus our guest this week is going to be Chris Harrison. He's an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon, and he actually built a smart wall project that we talked about last week. And he and I are talking about human-computer interactions. You're gonna want to listen to this. We'll also have a message from our sponsor, MachineQ, a Comcast service, and we'll answer a question from one of our listeners. So let's get it on the road with a message from one of our sponsors. This week's sponsor is Twilio. Twilio Programmable Wireless makes it easy for developers to program cellular connectivity, whether you're working with a few devices or thousands. Get connected fast using no shenanigans, no contract, and pay-as-you-go pricing. You can connect devices in over 120 countries around the world. Programmable Wireless offers you the scale and strength of the Twilio network, trusted by millions of developers all over the world. Check out twilio.com/wireless. I actually am going to order one of these because I have a super secret IoT project that I am going to start. So you guys will hear more about my super secret project in a couple weeks.
We actually use Twilio for the IoT voicemail. I don't know if people realize that. That's the back-end service that we use, not the cellular part that they're talking about, but...
Yeah, so we trust it. You can too. All right, let us move ahead with exciting news this week. Biggest news, we thought, was Amazon's security announcement, which, as far as news goes, was kind of like I'm going to say it was a bit of lame.
Not very exciting, actually, but we'll talk about it anyway because it's worth talking about.
Yes. So last week, Amazon said that they are going to provide smart home services and security for users. And this fits with some of the purchases they've made, plus the fact that security is so far the best gateway into a smart home for just about anyone. What is kind of surprising about Amazon's thing is they're actually not doing any monitoring. They're basically packaging up a bunch of devices and they're going to install it for you. So is this exciting? It is if you don't want to do like a DIY system. It's still what I would think of as a DIY system. It's just a DIY system that someone else installs for you. So The cheapest option is a $240 option that includes an Echo Dot, some lighting inside, and some lighting outside. And that's $240 for them to come up and do it. It runs all the way to like super smart, and that's $840, and you're going to get a siren, motion control, contact sensors, safety sensors, cameras, a dot, a video doorbell, and outdoor lighting.
And a hub, but not the hub that Amazon makes, which is the Echo Plus.
Yes. So Kevin astutely noticed this. I'm glad he did. Instead of the Echo Plus, which is the Echo with a Zigbee radio in it, Amazon's sending people a Wink hub.
Yeah, the Wink hub too.
Which is Kevin's hub of choice and my hub of choice for anyone who doesn't want to deal with complexity and has a pretty basic setup. So this is really weird.
It is really weird. And you know what? I got not trash, but people, when the Echo Plus hub came out, I said it's a non-starter for me because it has no Z-Wave radio. It just had Zigbee, Bluetooth, and Wi-Fi. Obviously, Z-Wave is still a big part of this market for many, many reasons. And by doing this, by going with a Wink Hub 2 in all of the packages that include a hub, it just illustrates to me, I don't want to say I was right, but Amazon knows the Z-Wave is still important. A lot of these products are Z-Wave products.
Yeah, when you look at the sensor market, you're looking usually at a Z-Wave sensor or maybe a Zigbee sensor. But most of my sensors are actually Z-Wave. So this, again, makes a ton of sense. If you want all this stuff to work, you're going to have to... And I also think maybe the goal is, oh, hey, yeah, it's super complicated to program all this stuff to work together. Let's get an expert in to do it. And that's basically what Kevin and I do all day is create these robots and programs. And then you just tie it to an Echo Dot, which you tell the customer, you're like, hey, if you say this, the following things will happen. We set it all up for you. So that fits. A couple weeks ago, I had someone from Lennar on, and they talked about how they set up a home with the Amazon Echo and all this smart stuff. And they do it basically by sitting down with the family, doing a Q&A, asking them what they like to do, how they like things to work. And then they basically program it for them. It's exactly the model that you have at the high end when you're talking about like some of these Crestron and I don't know, X10, these big fancy systems.
Right. So. It was also interesting to me that these are actual Amazon employees that will come to your home. They're not contracting this out. So obviously they're making an investment there to educate the employees on the smart home market and work with customers directly.
Yes. And that's awesome because we need this. I mean, most people are not going to want to program or think about this stuff.
Right.
And yeah, and we'll hear later from Kevin because he's involved in one of these projects right now.
I am. One other quick note, just because they are making or are using, they being Amazon, using the Wink Hub 2, makes you wonder, would Amazon potentially acquire Wink?
You know, it's gone through many hands. It was started way back in the day by the Quirky guys. The Quirky guys were like, two startups, Quirky and Wink, it's too much. So when Quirky went bankrupt, they sold Wink to the company owned by will.i.am. And
Flex. You're
right. You're right. I missed that. Right. They sold it to Flex. And then after about a year, Flex was like, And so they sold it to the company owned by will.i.am. I will say the Wink hardware and software is really good. It really works well for most people. So it would be a real shame if the market lost this.
True. I mean, even if they were to acquire a Wink, I mean, it doesn't mean you couldn't buy it and use it with, Google Home and so on and so forth. So I don't think it would go away in that regard. And in fact, I'd feel better if a company like an Amazon actually owned it, because it's not like their cloud center, which provides a lot of services, is going to disappear. I mean, that's their bread and butter right now. So I would actually feel better in a sense in that regard. And when we recommend the Wink, I often see questions from listeners and readers on the site saying, you guys were worried that it might disappear because it's been sold so many times. Yes, and that's something that has to be part of your purchase decision, but it hasn't gone away yet. So
it's really easy to use. And you can actually buy the Wink Hub 2 for $99 on its website and a couple other places. And oftentimes I see this on sale for like $70 or even $50. Okay, in other Amazon news, Charlie Kindle, who was the head of the Madam A Smart Home project, has left. And we had Charlie actually on the show maybe a year ago. He was fantastic because he's one of the only people who I've encountered who have more connected devices in their house than I do. So always fun to talk to him. He joined Amazon in 2013, so 5 years ago. And now he's leaving just to hang out and do his own thing. It sounds like he's tired, which makes sense.
I mean, in his personal blog post, he was saying he just wants to take a serious break from work. I can totally understand that. I mean, Amazon has made huge strides in this market over the last 5 years. Charlie obviously has a lot to do with that. He mentioned he's got like a car restoration project that he hasn't touched in 2 years. He hasn't updated his smart home since 2001. So he said it's getting very crusty. So, some people are trying to read into this, but I think it's exactly what he's saying. He just needs a break.
Yeah. So thanks, Charlie, for all that you've done connecting stuff. And I know that he has been very proactive and reactive to requests that, I've made to him and tried to ask him questions about and adding things. So I am sad, but
hey, maybe he's got more free time to talk to us now.
There we go. I'll have him come out and decrustify my smart home. Or maybe give it a chance to add a little crustiness since everything's changing all the time. In the smart speaker market, Facebook, which is doing F8 this week, basically said that they are going to take their smart speaker that is going to include M, its smart assistant, to international markets first. Or at least that's what CNBC wants to think.
Yeah, well, we had reported or read reports of them postponing this smart speaker a couple weeks, maybe even a few months ago. And as a US-based company, it sort of made sense to launch it here. But with all of the brouhaha over Cambridge Analytics and Facebook data and privacy, it wouldn't surprise me if they do this overseas first. Those people outside of the US have been less affected, at least in the headlines. So, yeah.
So far that we know of.
So far.
What I actually thought was interesting is I had thought Project M, which is Facebook's AI program, you guys may remember it because it was a chat bot that you could just ask to do things and it would happen. But it was both AI plus actual people on the back end. And it sounded they had shut that down, the chatbot aspect of it down, because it sounded like it wasn't scalable. And Facebook is all about scale with their 2 billion users. So I thought it was interesting that they're going to have a smart voice assistant named M, and that it's kind of part of that program. Although I doubt there would be a real person on the back end, because man, if someone was like a real person on the back end listening to some of my Madam A or Google requests, I'd be like, oh God.
And I would have a serious problem asking a chatbot to flip the switch on my lights and actually have somebody overseas or in
a mechanical
data
Turk
center
somewhere
flip the switch. Yeah. Yeah.
That would be quite awkward. Very Rube Goldberg. So
yeah.
That's what we know about that. We'll see if that happens. If you're in an international market and one day you get a chance to buy a Facebook speaker, let us know if you actually would. I have to say that I would not. I would run screaming from that, but that's just me.
I would do the same. I've heard, and this is just hearsay, that Japan will be the launch area.
Okay, we'll see. So, we're getting even creepier now. So, we have to bring up China all the time because to me, it's just baffling. And it also looks like the worst case scenario for a lot of this connected technology that we're building. And maybe it's just a cultural difference, but China is now mining data directly from their workers' brains, thanks to caps on their heads, to find out how they're feeling,
Yeah.
to find out all kinds of things, just general data. So what they do is they put caps on workers' heads in the rail industry to measure emotional responses to things like tiredness, and they're kind of aggregating all this data to see what they can see.
Well, I sort of get the approach. They're using that information to say, hey, this employee is maybe overtired, may not make the best decisions right now. Let's rotate this person out as a result of that. It's no different than, say, industrial IoT and a machine. Maybe the machine is going to, quote unquote, break down soon. I don't mean the person would, but it's the best analogy I can come up with. So I get that, but wow, China is just going all out with personal monitoring. I mean, we've talked about, the smart cameras that capture jaywalkers and the points that you can earn by being a good citizen based on your social media posts and
paying your bills on time.
Yeah. I mean, if this is where we're headed, I'm not so sure it's not a future I want to be a part of, I don't think, but wow.
And a while back, I had someone talk about things like Fitbit data in HR. So if your HR gives you a Fitbit for maybe health insurance purposes, some of the interesting use cases that pop up from that is, what happens if your company can measure how well you slept last night? And maybe they look and they're like, oh, Stacy, you only got 4 hours of sleep versus this guy who got 6. We're going to let him handle this today. Whereas maybe I have a new baby at home. Maybe it's not to say that I should be penalized for that. So there's a lot of privacy implications. Yes, obviously this is happening in China, but this is something that could conceivably come into play in your life today or in the not too distant future. So keep an eye.
Not my life and not today.
I don't know, Kevin. I'm going to start monitoring. Kevin, we can't record the show until you've got more caffeine in your system. It's looking dangerously low.
I'm wearing this ankle bracelet you sent me, Stacy. What's it for?
Exactly. So now, basic news. A lot of news this week. So first up, SmartThings, new hub coming with Thread support, which I actually was a little surprised by this because it's actually the SmartThings Hub 2, has Zigbee support, and Thread is it's a slightly different variation on the underlying Zigbee radio. So basically you're talking about the same radio standard here. It's the 802.15.4 spec, so radio spec. So you take one of these, and most of the newer and probably chips from at least the last 2 years ago are backwards compatible, and that you can do a software update to get both Zigbee and Thread compatibility. So my hunch is the radio in the SmartThings 2 hub wasn't capable of doing that, because this is why they need to launch a new one, I guess.
That makes sense to me because the SmartThings Hub 2 does not support Zigbee Pro. And I just wonder, that may have something to do with the radio of choice that they put in there, which would potentially then cause them not to have Weave Thread support, with a software update. So we should probably mention this information came from somebody on Twitter who was scouring the FCC database, and the FCC has tested a new SmartThings hub across its radio transmissions and so on and so forth. So there's no announcement of a SmartThings hub, a new one from Samsung, but obviously one has been tested, so therefore it is very likely coming. It looks a lot like the current one. has a Ethernet port on the back as well as a USB port, and then all of the major radios inside. So that's good. It's not losing anything. It looks like it's only gaining something.
Got it. All right. In other news, smart luggage company BlueSmart is shutting down, and it's sold off its technology to TravelPro. The reason? Because it has its smart luggage that has a battery for charging plus GPS for tracking your luggage. Yay. But those batteries are not removable. And the airlines in December basically said, you know what? We don't like this smart luggage. It could blow up in our holds. Those lithium-ion batteries are terrible. So if you can't remove them, you can't carry this luggage on the plane, which sucks.
Yeah, that does. But so to me, I'm like, so why would a company buy them when the current company, BlueSmart, could just redesign with removable batteries?
My hunch is BlueSmart didn't have enough money to redesign. I mean, that's a pretty big project, I would guess. And so they decided to sell off. They sold about 65,000 of these. And basically, they're no longer honoring warranties on them. And you're pretty much hosed. So they probably bought the IP for cheap, just in case they want to do some patents, in case they wanted to launch their own smart luggage that doesn't have a non-removable battery. Those are, it's not uncommon. And BlueSmart did have a lot of stuff. They had the GPS tracking, they had weight sensors, they had the batteries for charging devices, and yeah, it's cool stuff. Cool stuff. Too cool for us. So that is BlueSmart. In other possibly dying company news, Withings has been sold back to its original founder, and just bear with us as we explain what Withings is. So Nokia brought Withings, turned it into its health unit. We talked about this a couple weeks ago on the show because we had heard that perhaps Google was going to buy this. So this is the Nokia Withings watch. They made a baby monitor. They made a blood tracker cuff. They made a lot of like health-oriented devices, I think sleep stuff. And basically Nokia said, this isn't doing anything for us. And so the company's original co-founder and chairman, Eric Carril, has now purchased it. And it's expected to close towards the end of June. So if you have this stuff, it's unclear. It's unclear what you should expect.
Yeah, I'm sure Eric Carril has made some good money on this because Nokia purchased this company for $204 million 2 years ago, and now they're selling it back. I'm sure he's getting it for a song at this point.
So, I mean, this is good. Presumably he loves this, he'll try to support it. You know, maybe he's got some great ideas that he didn't see come to fruition. So we'll hope. Google, they have rolled out reviews for Assistant, Actions, and Apps. Kevin, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, this is new. If you go into the Google Assistant on an Android phone, because I tried it on iOS and it did not work for me, but on an Android phone, if you search for an action or an app, which they've already had that functionality, they've added the ability to submit reviews and even see reviews. And I think this is great because you don't know what you're adding to your smart home speaker until you actually install it and use it. But if you can crowdsource review information and get an idea of, what's worthwhile and what's not, that saves a lot of time and makes the experience better. So I assume that the Google Assistant app on iOS will get this very soon. But for now, if you hit the Explore tab in Google Assistant on Android, do a search for any action or app, you will start seeing reviews. Because they just rolled this out, there aren't too many. I didn't find many reviews, but I've seen some online where people did dig around and found some. So that's good. Just got to give it time to populate, I presume.
Got it. So much time. All right. And big news for Zigbee. We're talking about how big Z-Wave still is. And here's some news from Zigbee, Kevin.
Yeah, the Zigbee Alliance has been chosen for smart meter rollouts to every home in Great Britain by 2020. So that is a big win for the Zigbee folks. I think this is great to have a standard protocol, standardized smart home meters, and so on. So if you live in Great Britain, you will be able to, I assume, purchase this, or maybe they install it through your power company. I don't know how that all works out in the UK, but this is great for energy metering, energy management. They're, of course, touting increased savings for utilities and customers, etc. So again, big win for the Zigbee Alliance on this one.
Yes, and Hive, which was created by British Gas as a smart home company. So they started with a smart thermostat and they've moved into other products. They are actually a Zigbee-based system. So this makes total sense. And Hive, just by the way, is planning to come to the US. So keep your eye on that. Okay, and now here's where Kevin and I are going to opine on the state of the smart home. I wrote something in my newsletter last week. Basically, the bottom line is I'm disappointed in the smart home. We have not gotten any further than I thought We are still solving the same problems in 2018 that we had identified all the way back in 2012 and 2013. So things like a lack of standards, high cost, no valuable use cases, it's confusing, blah, blah, blah. These are all still issues today, and voice has helped, but it hasn't helped enough. And frankly, I'm disappointed. That's the short, too long didn't read version of my story. And Kevin is living this.
Yeah, I am right now, because I had mentioned on the last show that I was going to switch back from SmartThings to Wink. And I started to make that migration thinking it should be pretty easy. I had Wink before, no problem. And even though I disconnected all of my devices from the SmartThings hub before I shut that hub down and started re-adding back to Wink, it's been a frustrating experience. Some of the devices are still, they're just having problems linking back to Wink. I've even reset some of them. And it's my bulbs in particular that I go through the reset process. And depending on the bulb, it's, an off on sequence for, anywhere from a half second to 3 seconds and so on and so forth. And the Wink app walks you through that for each type of bulb you have. I have some Lightify bulbs and I have some Cree bulbs, and sometimes the reset's working, sometimes it's not. And it's just so frustrating. I literally, to this day, still have a couple bulbs that are no longer smart. They're just dumb bulbs because the reset process isn't resetting them, and it's just really, really frustrating. And
is it all the same bulb? What bulb? Because I want to not buy those.
It's this particular ones are Cree bulbs, but some of my other Cree bulbs are okay. So I don't know that it's a Cree thing. I'm thinking it's more of a hub thing. I don't know yet. I don't know, and I got to figure it out. Additionally, because everything was linked in the Amazon Madam A app, and I tell it to rediscover devices, even though I've re-added these devices through Wink, it's still showing the SmartThings implementations of them and saying, hey, the server is not connected or not responded. I'm like, because that's not in place anymore. So I had to manually delete and figure out which ones were working, which ones weren't in Madam A, and manually delete them and re-add them. And it's just more hassle than it needs to be. It's just so frustrating. And, it makes me wonder how smart Amazon actually is by doing all this installation and configuration for you. I mean, if we have problems, and I think you're going to talk about another problem that you've been having lately. If we're having problems and we've been doing this for years, maybe it's not us, maybe it's the devices,
Yes. Or it's us because we're crazy enough to try to do all this. Ha ha ha. Yes. And I will tell you, so what you basically did, although you didn't take all the steps, you actually just did the IoT spring cleaning I did a while back. So if you're going to do something crazy like this, I would tell you, do the formal uninstall of each device first. So disconnect it formally from your hub. Then, actually, I guess your first step should be unlinking your stuff from Amazon or Google, whichever, or both. Then do the formal uninstall of the device from the hub, and then reset your hub that you're going to use. Delete everything from Amazon and Google, even the existing stuff that's still on there, and then slowly add it all back. Now, if your lights do not reset to the hub, that is a problem. But that is the best way to do it without incurring weird, glitchy mistakes, because you're otherwise going to get them. I'm sorry. It's terrible. And it takes a couple hours. It's a project, you guys. So my sad saga, which again, I am cursed. So I went to install the Nest Yale Smart Lock. And as part of that, I was resetting everything on the Google Home Hub in the Google Home app, because I was trying to totally Googleify my house as much as I could. And taking everything off Google Home and then putting it back on caused me some drama, much like Kevin had drama. And then I also had some struggles connecting my Nest by Yale lock, or Yale by Nest lock, because the hardware side was not working. And the end result was that I installed it, and I never actually got the chance to add the app because the touchpad never lit up. And so I rechecked everything. I checked all my connections. I reset the device just in case. I changed out the batteries and all the common troubleshooting things that you have to do. And it still didn't work. So I spent an hour and like 15 minutes on the phone with Nest, and they were finally like, basically they told me to do all the things that I had done, which is fine. And then they were like, yeah, I think this isn't a software issue. It's a hardware issue. So we're going to send you over to Yale. And they sent me to Yale, and Yale was like, yeah, that sounds like a hardware issue. We're just going to send you another. So it was a long time to get a replacement. What I will say is this process did work. It worked in the sense that Nest had a warm transfer to Yale, which meant that they handled my case seamlessly from my perspective when they transferred me over. And that is how these things should work. It's kind of unrealistic to expect Nest to handle Yale's hardware problems, but it is totally realistic as a customer to say, hey, I ended up at Nest. Your job is to get me to Yale without making my life miserable. And they did that. It did take a while, but that's customer support.
No, and that is the right process, and I'm glad it worked out. It's a shame it takes that long, but I can understand why that is. And in my situation, I got to believe most people don't switch hubs nearly as often as we do. So maybe I'm whining about a problem that nobody else has or will experience.
No, because it is hard. Like sometimes things break. And I have had to maybe not uninstall everything and put it over, but I've had glitches where something stops working. My IKEA Trodfee lights are actually a perfect example of that. They just didn't work. So I had to uninstall them and reinstall them and try to get them to work with a particular hub. And so I think it's actually fairly common.
Sadly.
Yes. All right. And think about this. When you move, holy cow. Or if you decide to replace all your bulbs, just buy smart switches. And then leave them with the house. That's my advice to you. Okay, now let's go to the IoT Podcast Listener Hotline. And good news, everybody. Schlage is continuing to support the hotline through the end of the year. So
yay.
Everyone go out and buy a Schlage lock. Tell them I sent you. All right. But we are so glad because I think it's actually a real nice service for people. And I really appreciate that we're still doing this. So everybody go out and buy a Schlage lock. I'm sort of kidding. I mean, if you want a Schlage lock, just go out. Buy one. And if you want to see what they have, visit schlage.com to learn more. And we also today have to announce a winner for our April drawing. This is for a drawing for my old Netatmo Welcome camera. So this is the one that goes inside, recognizes people, and you record actually to an SD card, so you don't ever have to send it to the cloud. I love this camera. And now Steve can love it too. So Steve, you are our winner, and you are actually asking our question today. So if you have a question for us, give us a call at 512-623-7424, and we will be happy to answer it for you. Or we will be happy to tell you we have no answer for you. It could work both ways, you guys, to be honest. So let's hear from Steve.
Hi, Stacy and Kevin. My name is Steve, and I'm trying to kill two birds with one stone and looking for a smart lock with a built-in camera. I have no desire for a smart doorbell, and my current layout isn't really great for one anyway. I don't want to have to buy and install a separate outdoor smart camera either. So far, I've only found the Gate smart lock, which was an Indiegogo. So I'm curious if you guys have any experience with that one, or if there are any others I should know about, either on the market already or possibly coming out down the road. Thanks so much.
Oh, Steve, this is actually a tough one because cameras require Wi-Fi, and Wi-Fi sucks batteries like nobody's business, and connected door locks, usually their batteries are kind of a pain to change. So it's very tough to find some sort of door lock with a camera. That being said, I think Kevin has found the closest thing possible.
Well, I did a bunch of research, and unfortunately, I came up with the exact same single option right now that Steve himself came up with, and that is the Gate Smart Lock, which will cost $349. For the reasons that you just mentioned, battery life mainly, nobody else that I can find is making a door lock with a camera in it. You know, it's a technical challenge for sure. It's interesting, the Gate Smart Lock has a removable and rechargeable battery on the back of it, and you can even purchase a spare battery for $59 that recharges in 5 hours. Battery should last you about 3 months, they say, but that's probably going to depend on how much video streaming you actually do from your doorbell. So
and also
that's
how
cold
it is. In the
very
winter,
true.
Expect your battery to last maybe 2.
Yeah, that's actually very, very true. I see the same thing on my car, which has a battery in it to run the electric wheels. Yeah, I don't know what other options there are right now. And this started on Indiegogo, as Steve had said. It is now available directly from the company. So I've even seen some Amazon reviews, and there haven't been many, and they've been a little bit all over the map. One was terrible, and 2 or 3 were good to excellent. I will say some people did not like the quality of the video itself. And I should note it is a 720p video camera, so it's not a full HD video camera. That may be important to you, may not, but for right now, it looks like the Gate is it.
Yeah, so sorry about that, Steve. On the plus side, you won a free camera. All right. Now, stay tuned for our guest. This week's guest is Chris Harrison, who is an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University. We're talking about human-computer interactions in the smart home. We're talking about his smart wall project and about digital paper. So it's actually really cool, I think, as a nerdy person who loves this stuff. And so hopefully you will too. And now, a message from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a break from this week's Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is Machine Q, a Comcast service. And I have Alex Karam, the GM of Machine Q, here. So let's just kick this off with, what is Machine Q?
Machine Q is Comcast's enterprise-grade network specifically built for IoT. We work with B2B and B2B2C use cases who want to leverage our network so they can focus on building IoT applications for them. We also have a growing and robust portfolio of business solutions that we're providing to end customers as well.
In a lot of cases, people looking for IoT networks are looking for IoT networks everywhere. And my understanding is Comcast, you guys have a broadband footprint that is not everywhere. How are you guys handling that?
Since the last public announcement we made regarding our 15-city metropolitan area launch, and we cover hundreds of cities within those areas, many of the customers that are looking to us to provide IoT connectivity do have needs, as you would imagine, outside of traditional footprint. So what we've done is effectively allow them to either bring their own broadband device, and they can connect back virtually to our network, and we end up managing these gateways for them in the field. So whether it's in a farm in Iowa or it's a warehouse someplace in Detroit, we have clients who are deploying solutions for their end users in these locations where we might not have particular sort of coverage in that particular location, but with our connectivity on demand service, which allows us to ship these LoRaWAN gateways to a location they need, we're able to sort of virtualize that network for them in places that are not in our quote-unquote traditional footprint.
Excellent. And one of the customers that you guys recently announced was Victor, which is a pest control company. So how are you working with Victor, which I assume pest coverage is a nationwide issue? How are you working with them to create connected pest control devices?
We're able to help Victor add additional access technology to some of their connected pest control devices, in this case a low-power device, which solves their problem for coverage in hard-to-reach locations like attics or basements. In terms of making sure that they're in footprint, clearly in the places that we have built network and we've announced, it's not a problem. That works out well. In other locations throughout the country where clearly they might have a need and we haven't built there just yet or reside outside of footprint, we're able to couple their connected mousetrap, their LoRaWAN connected mousetrap, with one of our Machine Q LoRaWAN gateways. So we can drop ship them anywhere they want to make sure they can serve their clients. We're excited to work with IoT solutions companies who have a need for low power devices anywhere in the country and need an IoT-grade network, a network provider like Comcast to support them.
Awesome. If you want to build a better mousetrap or something else, where should people go to find out more about Machine Q?
You can start with our website at machineq.com. We have some great white papers there, including our latest on dense network studies, technical and business level product and services info, and conversion guides and resources to develop on Machine Q, including network coverage details and how you can get service both in and outside of the Comcast footprint.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Chris Harrison, who is an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon. He works with human-computer interactions. So hi Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Stacey.
I am super excited. So last week, we actually talked on this show about one of your projects, the Smart Wall. And I want you just to quickly remind everyone what it is that the Smart Wall is.
Well, we realized about a year ago that there's one thing that is truly ubiquitous in homes and offices and pretty much every human environment, and that's walls. And despite us having all this incredible computing technology, we really haven't transformed the wall. The walls of today, we're not surprised that, a Roman or a Greek or a Babylonian, they'd say, this is all you've done with walls in 2,000 years. And so we decided to invent technology that would let us transform those walls into something much smarter.
Got it. And the end result was basically creating capacitive touch capability in walls, if I'm putting it really basically.
Well, that's one part of it. So actually, the project does two things. One is it lets us add touch sensing to walls. So we might be able to use them as sort of a gestural canvas. So instead of having to walk over to a light switch and flip a switch, which is just sort of a little silo of interactivity on a wall, is we can use the entire wall surface so we can dim just by sliding up our hands up and down on any part of the wall because the whole thing is touch sensitive. the second part of it is once we imbued walls with these basically antennas or electrodes, just like you would have on a capacitive smartphone screen, is we also realized that they're really good at sensing the electrical noise that comes off of appliances. So everything that runs on electricity is like a little tiny radio station. So your microwave or your laptop or your TV or a lamp, everything emits a little bit of just electromagnetic noise. It's not harmful, it's just what they do. And we found that our walls, once we had augmented them, were really good at picking up these signals. And so we can actually have machine learning or artificial intelligence look at those signals and actually guess what things must be on in your environment. So your walls are not only sensing your touches, but also what's happening in those environments. Are you making dinner, or is your TV on? And we can feed that to smart assistants, things like Alexa or Google Home, to actually know what's going on around them.
Okay, we're going to get back to that concept in a minute. But you also have a smart paper. Talk to me about what that is.
Yeah, so the lab is really keen on trying to bring interactivity to new objects and new experiences. So walls is one end of it. We're trying to bring interactivity into the home as opposed to just a little tiny doodad, IoT doodad stuck on your wall like a Nest thermostat, is trying to kind of have that be truly ubiquitous and be everywhere. And paper is another one of these ubiquitous mediums that has no inherent interactivity. A sheet of paper is just a sheet of paper. You use it, you throw it away. You can digitize it by, taking a photo of it with your smartphone, but it isn't really truly interactive itself. And part of the same reason why both things have not received interactivity, both walls and paper, is that they're very good at what they do, and they're very low cost. And so if I go to you and I say, hey, I can make you a smart wall, but it's going to cost $1 million to upgrade your home, or here's this interactive sheet of paper, but it costs $100 per sheet, then both of those are no longer walls and paper, respectively. There's something different. And so if you really want to have people's existing walls and existing sort of paper become interactive, but be used and thought of in the same way, that they're just smarter versions of themselves, they need to be very low cost, especially paper, which we literally can throw out after a single use. And so in both projects, there was an enormous challenge of how do you bring touch sensing to these surfaces in a cost-effective way. So cheap that you could put it on everything and not really think twice about it.
So when I saw your video of this, my first thought was actually not cost, but holy cow, this turns something that's recyclable and everywhere into what? Is it environmentally feasible to do this?
We set out and really hoped that we could still keep those properties of paper. Because if we made a paper that you're going to keep forever, you've essentially just made a not very good iPad. So we wanted something that, and we talk about this in the paper, something that has recyclability and something that you can still use in a single-use fashion. So you get this touch-screen paper, touch-sensitive paper rather, and you can write all over with a Sharpie, and you don't feel bad about throwing it out. While obviously there's more implications to discuss with respect to recyclability, and obviously this is not going to be quite as easy to recycle as just a regular sheet of paper. Nonetheless, we've shown that there are ways to recycle things that have been laminated in this way. There's a lot of food packaging products like milk cartons and so on that have the ability to be recycled in processing facilities that have been coded in a very similar way. So while I think there is certainly more work to be done, we do think this approach could be compatible with existing kind of recycling processes and be low cost enough that you would truly throw it out after a single use.
Okay. And this reminded me mostly of LiveScribe, which I don't know how old you are, how long you've been in the world of tech, but it used to be a journal or paper that you used in conjunction with a connected pen. Obviously, this doesn't require a special connected pen. So I'm guessing the smarts there were more in the pen than in the paper?
Right. So there's really two main approaches that have been used to do kind of digital paper or tracked paper. One is you kind of have a special book or volume that you clip something to, and it'll track the pen with sensors that are operating on the top of the book, let's say. And the other approach is to have a smart pen that has essentially a camera built into the tip that can actually track where the pen is writing, and by virtue of that can actually digitize things like letters. And so this approach is different in that we try to put all the smarts inside the paper itself, as opposed to having kind of the smart pen. And that means that everything is applicable. Post-it notes and cardboard packaging and printer sheets and loose leaf. Anything could work with our approach. It doesn't have to be especially printed in some particular means. It also can work with just fingers. So we actually have some demos that we have in our demo reel where, paper can be interesting just as a finger medium, not just as a written medium. And of course, obviously, we don't want to have to put something special like a camera onto the tip of your finger in order for it to work. So both approaches, I think, are very valid. They're just different ways of attacking this problem.
All right. And going back to walls, the thing that flipped me out the most about this, I think, was this idea of, I have in my mind this picture of walls in a connected home or a connected office as being a place where you shoot a screen or you shoot information that can't be conveyed via audio or maybe by some sort of ambient light kind of happening. So more complicated pieces of information. When I saw the wall, I was like, oh, that is a totally different thing to do with the wall. So I'm curious, why focus on touch there? Or
So you could use screens, and you could obviously tie our technology into a projected screen. So now it's not only just a projector that's static, but we can actually have it be a touch-sensitive screen, as opposed to having to hang like a big LCD screen on your wall. So, which is quite aesthetically obtrusive and also quite expensive to do because you have to run cables to the wall and if you want to look nice, et cetera, et cetera. So a projector would be a nice way to have this sort of seamless on-wall experience. But we want your walls to still be walls. We don't want to have your whole smart environment look like it has to be from like the 23rd century. We actually quite like the notion of keeping your house looking like it is and the technology being somewhat invisible. And when you walk up to that wall and, you push your palm print, to it, then the voice agent wakes up and says, how can I help you? And that could be a ubiquitous capability in your home. So we very much subscribe to this sort of notion that Mark Weiser said. He's often considered the kind of the father of ubiquitous computing, that the best technologies are the ones that are invisible. And we definitely subscribe to that belief. And walls are great as walls. That's where we've kept them. We haven't replaced them with something crazy. We want them to still be walls, but to imbue them with extra functionality. And we think this is a nice, lightweight way to do that. And we can remove a lot of these little, again, kind of silos of IoT smartness that we currently do. When we think of a smart wall now, it's very much taking an IoT computer and then sticking it to the wall, as opposed to the wall itself being the thing that's smart.
I like it. Hopefully it will come with incredibly dirt-resistant or fingerprint-resistant paint.
Yes, we're leaving that for the paint companies to solve.
I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And then I'm like, wait a second. No. Okay. So let's get into this broader idea because you've actually worked, obviously it's your special HCI, but you've done some projects that also deal with connectivity in the home and talking to computers in weird places. So as we put computing everywhere, one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we make them smarter? And for that, I feel like we're going to need a lot of innovation around providing computers with context. I would love to get your thoughts about what are, especially in the home or in the office environment, what are kind of good examples, or what do you think make for good examples of context that computers can use to identify people or to identify actions?
All those things. And I think that right now, these devices that we say are smart are really quite dumb. And I think it's important for us in the kind of IoT industry and people that think about technology to recognize that. And I think the canonical example is one of these voice assistants sitting on your kitchen countertop. Let's think like an Alexa or Google Home or Apple HomePod. They're sitting on your kitchen countertop and they have no idea they're in a kitchen, let alone what you're doing in the kitchen. I mean, they literally have no idea. That's how smart they are. And of course, if I teleported you into my kitchen at home and I blindfolded you and you could listen to the sounds going on around you, you'd probably be able to identify that you're in a kitchen pretty fast. And you'd probably be able to even guess what I'm doing. If I've got things, frying on a pan or if there's clinking of silverware or I'm running a blender, you'd instantly know that you're in a kitchen and probably what was going on with very high accuracy. So we know that the signals are there and you don't need to stick a camera in someone's kitchen to be able to do that. And those are all examples of understanding the context and activity. And right now, these devices really ignore that. So what this wall project is doing is it's giving one extra piece of information. We're not using sound in this case. We're listening again to these electronic kind of emissions that are coming from electrical appliance, electromagnetic interference or EMI, because electrically driven motors and digital kind of appliances like the keypad on your microwave all emit a little bit of this noise, and our walls, being very nice large antennas that we just happen to have in our environment, can pick those up. And we can imagine feeding that to a local smart device, whatever form it may be, even if it's just your smartphone or your smartwatch, to inform them about what's going on. So for me, like a great example is when we kind of put one of these antennas in the mechanical room in my house, we could actually monitor not only when the laundry machine was on, but also what kind of cycle it was in, so that I could actually get a proactive alert saying, hey, Chris, laundry is done. Do you want to put it in the dryer? So that's actually pushing information to me. Right now, these smart devices don't really proactively engage the user. And that's an example of something that could actually happen if these devices knew more about their context.
Got it. And in this case, you're really just talking about what's going on in the room that the device is in. I have spent a lot of time thinking about this, focused on who is in the room. But do you think that really matters? And then that gets into some all of these get into privacy implications, but maybe that gets into more privacy?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, all these have to be, I think, privacy is something that you always have to consider. But at the same time, if you can deliver value to people, then privacy can be partially set aside. And the great example is the smartphones. I mean, these are very sophisticated devices loaded full of sensors that are tracking everywhere you go and listening to every phone call that you make. And so it's a very privacy invasive device. I mean, it really could be listening to everything that we're doing, and yet we happily carry them around because we extract so much value from this. So everything you have to realize in privacy is that it's a value proposition. And if you get that balance wrong, no one will adopt it. If you get it right, everyone has it like a smartphone today. So I think for these sort of technologies to be successful is they have to really deliver on value. And that I think is where IoT is having a bit of a problem right now, because they're seeing a modest gain, but it's not necessarily the right gain for the monetary outlay and the privacy implications. So that's on us to get that kind of, formulation correct. In this case, yes, we can probably track people and we can track all this appliance use, and maybe that would actually reveal things. Are the kids watching too much TV? Are they spending too much time on their computers, et cetera, et cetera? We can track all that very readily. So yes, it is complicated. And the more information that we give these devices, the smarter they will be. But it definitely comes at a potential cost.
Okay. And then let's talk about knowing who's in the home or who's in the room cooking. What is the value there? Do you think we could work around that knowledge?
So the best examples of knowing who is interacting, and this could be in the car, it could be in the home, it could be whatever in the office, right, is being able to do personalization. In the same way that your Netflix account is tracking all the shows that you give 5 stars to and 1 star to, this notion of collaborative filtering where we can leverage the tastes of millions of people to find people that are sort of like you to recommend new shows and new songs. And this is what Spotify and all these services do. You can imagine if you're asking your, let's say, a virtual assistant to pick on them, to recommend a recipe. They know your previous habits and maybe that you even dialed back on some ingredients or increased certain ingredients, or that you only search for spicy food, whatever it may be. And they can actually recommend those proactively, but they need to know who that is, because if anyone just asks, you may get the wrong recipe. So tailoring, when I want to hear the news and it plays news that I'm interested in, topics that I'm interested in, I request recipes and it knows it's me, so it's requesting those recipes. Those are all little subtle examples of personalization that a real human assistant would do effortlessly. Obviously, like the way that I like my coffee is probably different than the way you like your coffee. And right now, most of these devices are pretty agnostic to who's asking that question. But that's really the difference between an amazing kind of human assistant versus a lot of these kind of IoT-based machines right now. They're all depersonalized, where actually we probably are very close to having a personalized experience.
Okay, and then my next question is, which do you think we'll get to first? Do you think we'll have environmental context or personalization?
Personalization is much easier to do because we can use the sensors that are already on these devices without having to do something that's more exotic, like paint your walls. And at least Google's products I know already do personalize. If I ask the Google Home that I have in my house right now to call mom, it will call my mom as opposed to my wife's mom. So Google's already personalizing it, but obviously the technology is already there to do basically a voice print among a family. So we're on the sort of eve of personalization. Environments are tricky because it's hard to do with sound alone, although it is possible. We're doing some research on that now. But there's so many things that happen, in homes. It's hard to do that really, really robustly. And if you have error cases where, your Google Home thinks it's in the kitchen, but really it's in the garage, and it starts personalizing itself, telling you how to cook, but you're trying to work on your car, then you start breaking the experience and people, complain. So there's more work to be done on environmental knowledge and how to leverage that in a very useful way. Because again, it can just guess it's in the kitchen, but then what does it do with that? Does it know that you're cooking dinner and therefore it's going to hold any sort of alert? That's a much more open question that people haven't really been able to articulate a strong vision for.
Sure. And I think that, again, will tie back to personal preferences. Like when I'm cooking, I want no interruptions because
Right.
I can't focus. Other people might be like, yes, it's social, it's fun. Okay, let's talk about the next areas of things that you're researching.
So I run a lab at Carnegie Mellon, and collectively we're working together to kind of envision the future and do that with prototyping. So we don't just envision the future as science fiction. We actually try to see how to build those technologies in at least a plausibly feasible way. And we like to actually build them because you can put them in front of real people and actually gauge their experience. You can't just describe a technology to people and say, would you like it? More often than not, they're going to say, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. So we like to build everything, and everything you see in our videos is very much real. And we run, the standard kind of scientific studies, accuracy, and so on, looking at the cost and how feasible it would be to manufacture, et cetera, recyclability, as we talked about before. We try to think about all these issues holistically.
Agreed. So what else are you guys working on in your lab?
Each of my PhD students has kind of a different vein of research. Collectively, the lab is very much at the intersection of interactive technologies and machine learning. And it turns out that those are a very powerful combination because human signals are very messy. Like right now in this call, I am moving my hands around, gesticulating. I just can't help it. Like I have to move my hands when I speak. Maybe this is the professorial side of me coming out. And if I have smart devices in this room looking at me and they're trying to decide whether or not to activate, like is my light going to get brighter or dimmer or whatever, it has to make a judgment call. And it's a very lossy signal because it's not 0 or 1 or, mouse clicked or mouse not clicked. It's somewhere in between. And humans are really good at resolving that ambiguity. And traditionally, computers have not been. And machine learning is this really powerful and perfectly well-suited tool that we can resolve very complex input signals into something that's an actionable and sort of statistically viable or like a valid result. And so we combine kind of sensor data and machine learning to build new and novel interactive systems. In terms of new research thrusts, we are still doing a lot with on-body computing. So this notion that we want to have small computers, but rather than have big screens, is we have them with no screen potentially. And instead we use things like projection or augmented reality to co-opt space from the environment or even from the body itself. So instead of having a smartwatch with a pathetically tiny screen, which means that you can't use it in any really kind of fundamentally powerful way, what happens to that interactive experience? It spills out onto your body. And so your whole forearm is now a computer, which is many times larger than an iPhone, for example. And does that ultimately change our kind of viewpoint on wearables as sort of a novelty item that does health sensing into something much different? Also, there's another main thread looking at, if we are going to have things like wearables sitting on our arm, it sort of goes back to my comment before that you have a voice assistant speaker sitting on your kitchen countertop and it has no idea it's in the kitchen, let alone what you're doing in the kitchen. In the same way I look at smartwatches, they're sitting right there on that very enviable position, right there on your wrist. And yet they have no idea what your hands are doing, which seems like a huge missed opportunity. And so we've built a series of technologies that can actually sense what your hands are doing from your wristwatch. So the smartwatch knows not only what you're grabbing, so what objects you're grabbing, but also what gestures your hands are making. And together, we can get this really rich context sensing that we can pass to wearable devices.
I like it, although I'm not looking forward to the battle for my wall OS. All right, Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show this week.
You're very welcome.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.